The morning sun cast long shadows across the council chamber as delegates from across the galaxy took their seats. The massive hall could hold 10,000 beings, and today it was full representatives from every known species had come to witness something that happened only once every 100 years. The reading of the first law ambassador, Jamin of the human delegation, sat quietly in his assigned section. His dark hair was graying at the temples, and his brown eyes held the weight of countless diplomatic meetings. He wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps with no decorations or symbols of rank. The humans had learned long ago that showing off made other species nervous. 3 rows behind him sat the massive form of General Thakmor from the Stone People. His rocky skin gleamed under the chamber lights, and his forearms rested carefully on the specially built chair. The Stone People were older than most civilizations, and they remembered things that others had forgotten to. The left, the insectoid delegation buzzed quietly among themselves. Commander Veltar clicked his mandibles as he reviewed the datapad in his clawed hands. His compound eyes reflected the chamber lights like tiny mirrors. The insectoid hive controlled more worlds than any other single species, but they were newcomers to the council, having joined only 500 years ago. Above them all, the Supreme Chancellor called for order. His voice echoed through translation devices that converted his words into hundreds of different languages. The Chancellor belonged to the ethereal race, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form long ago. They served as neutral arbiters in galactic disputes. Day marks the 3000th anniversary of the first law. The Chancellor announced the law that has kept peace in our galaxy for longer than most species have existed. The law that protects the innocent and reminds us all of our shared responsibility. And shifted in his seat as memories flooded back. He had been just a child when his grandfather told him the story of how the first law came to be. His grandfather had been there during the Great War, when everything changed, when humanity showed the galaxy what they truly were beneath their peaceful exterior. The story began on a trade route between Earth and the Centauri colonies. A human merchant vessel called the New Dawn was carrying families to establish a new settlement. The ship held 300 adults and 150 children. The youngest was barely 2 years old. The oldest was 17. The Reptilian Empire in those days was expanding aggressively. They claimed that the trade route belonged to them, even though it passed through neutral space. Their warships stopped any vessel that tried to pass without paying tribute. The tribute was usually more than most traders could afford. Captain Minho of the New Dawn tried to negotiate. He explained that his ship carried families, not soldiers. He offered to pay a reasonable toll for safe passage, but the reptilian commander was young and arrogant. He wanted to make an example that would discourage other ships from using the route. The attack came without warning. Reptilian warships surrounded the New Dawn and opened fire. The merchant vessel had no weapons and weak shields. It was designed for carrying cargo and passengers, not for fighting. The first barrage destroyed the engine room and left the ship drifting helplessly in space. Minho sent out a distress signal, but the nearest human military base was 6 days away. Even if help came immediately, it would arrive too late. The reptilian commander demanded that all adults surrender themselves as prisoners. Anyone who resisted would be executed. The families had no choice. They gathered in the ship's cargo bay with their hands raised in surrender. The children clung to their parents, many of them crying from fear. The adults tried to stay calm for the sake of their young ones, but everyone knew that reptilian prison camps were places from which few returned. When the reptilian boarding party arrived, they separated the families. Adults were dragged away to transport ships, while children were left alone in the cargo bay. The reptilian commander had decided that children were useless as prisoners. They would only consume resources without providing labor. What happened next would haunt the galaxy for thousands of years. The reptilian commander ordered his soldiers to space the children. The airlock doors opened, and 150 young humans were sucked into the vacuum of space. Their last moments were filled with terror and pain as they died alone, far from home. The few adult survivors who witnessed this were kept alive to spread the word. The reptilians wanted other species to know what happened to those who defied their expansion. They wanted fear to clear the trade routes more effectively than any fleet. But they had made a terrible mistake. They had killed human children. The news reached Earth 3 days later, transmitted by the survivors who had escaped during a prisoner transfer. The reaction was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humans across known space simply stopped what they were doing and stared at the stars with expressions that made other species step back. In fear, Earth's government issued a single statement to the Reptilian Empire: return our children for burial or face the consequences. The Reptilian Emperor laughed at the demand. He had 40,000 warships scattered across 100 star systems. Humanity had barely 3,000 ships total. How could such a small species threaten the mighty Reptilian Empire? The Emperor's laughter died when human fleets began appearing in reptilian space. These were not the merchant vessels or small patrol ships that other species were used to seeing. These were warships that no one knew existed, ships that had been built in secret shipyards hidden throughout human space. The humans did not demand surrender. They did not issue ultimatums. They simply began destroying everything that belonged to the Reptilian Empire, not just military targets but colonies, infrastructure, trade routes, anything that supported the species that had murdered their children. Within 6 months, the Reptilian Empire ceased to exist. Not conquered, not occupied, but completely erased from the galaxy. Their worlds were left empty, their fleets were scattered, debris. Their civilization was nothing but a memory the other species watched in horror as humanity revealed what they truly were beneath their peaceful exterior. They were not the friendly traders and explorers that everyone had assumed. They were apex predators who had chosen to hide their true nature. When the war ended, the humans made a proposal to the newly formed Galactic Council. They would return to their peaceful ways. They would continue to trade and explore and build relationships with other species, but there would be one condition, one law that must never be broken: never harm human children. The law was written in simple words that any species could understand. It was carved into monuments on every council world. It was taught in every military academy. It was programmed into every warship's computer. For 3,000 years the law had held. The galaxy had known peace, because everyone remembered what happened when it was broken. But time has a way of making people forget, and new generations did not always learn the lessons of the past. In the council chamber, Ambassador Jamin listened as the Chancellor finished reading the first law aloud. He noticed that some of the younger delegates seemed restless, as if they thought the ceremony was just an old tradition with no real meaning. Commander Veltar of the insectoid hive was one of those who looked bored. His species had joined the council long after the Great War. They knew the story, but they had never seen humanity's true face. They thought the old warnings were just tales told to frighten children. As the ceremony ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Jamin felt a chill run down his spine. He had spent his entire career working for peace, trying to ensure that the galaxy never again saw what humans could become, but he could see in the eyes of some delegates that they had forgotten why the first law existed. They thought it was about protecting human children. They were wrong. The first law was about protecting them. The mining world of Kepler 442b spun slowly around its orange star, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape where humans had built their small settlement. 50 families had come here to start a new life far from the crowded worlds of human space. They wanted peace and quiet, and the chance to raise their children under open skies. Deho kicked a small stone as he walked home from school with his little sister Nari. The boy was 10 years old with dark hair that stuck up. No matter how much his mother tried to smooth it down, his sister was only 6, with bright, curious eyes that saw wonder in everything around her. The settlement was not much to look at, just a cluster of prefab buildings connected by covered walkways to protect against the harsh winds that swept across the planet. But to the children it was home. It was where they played and learned and dreamed about the future. Their father, Tajin, worked deep in the crystal mines that honeycombed the planet underground. He was a quiet man with strong hands and gentle eyes who always had time to listen when his children wanted to talk. Their mother Hijin worked beside him in the dangerous tunnels, using plasma cutters to extract the valuable crystals that powered starship engines. Today, something was different though. The adults whispered among themselves and kept glancing at the sky as if they expected to see something frightening. The children noticed, but they did not understand what had their parents so worried. In orbit high above the planet, Commander Veltar studied the readings on his tactical display. His insectoid features were hard to read, but his compound eyes glittered with anticipation. The hive had been planning this operation for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. The crystals on Kepler 442b were exactly what the hive needed for their new weapon project. The humans had legal mining rights, but the council had quietly decided that such things no longer mattered. Humanity was too scattered, too weak to defend every little settlement on the edge of known space. What could 50 families do against the might of the insectoid hive? Lieutenant Busker clicked nervously as he reviewed the target data. Sir, there are children in the settlement, 37 of them according to our scans. Should we not wait until they can be evacuated? Commander Veltar turned his massive head toward his subordinate. The old laws are no longer relevant, Lieutenant. The galaxy has changed, and we must change with it. The council needs these crystals and we will take them. But sir, the first law clearly states that the first law was written by a different council in a different time. Veltar interrupted. That humans have grown soft and complacent. They trade in luxuries and hide behind ancient treaties while stronger species shape the future of the galaxy. The lieutenant wanted to argue, but he knew better than to question his commander. The hive had its orders and soldiers were expected to follow them without question. Still, something deep in his genetic memory whispered warnings about harming human young. Down on the planet, Tajin felt the ground shake beneath his feet as he worked in the deep tunnels. The mining operation used controlled explosions to break through the rock, and at first he thought it was just another blast, but the shaking was too regular to rhythmic. Emergency lights began flashing red throughout the mine complex, and the automated voice of the safety system echoed through the tunnels. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. Teletajan dropped his tools and ran toward the surface access shaft. His wife, Hyjin, was already there along with the other day shift workers. Their faces were grim with fear and confusion. What is happening? Someone shouted over the noise of alarms and machinery. The answer came from the surface communication system as crackling voices reported what their sensors were detecting: multiple alien ships in orbit, armed vessels moving into attack formation. Tajin felt his blood turn to ice. His children were in the settlement school with all the other young ones. They would be trapped in the building. If an attack came, he had to reach them, but As he and the other miners reached the main elevator shaft, a new series of explosions shook the ground. These were not mining charges. These were weapons firing from space. The attack had begun on the surface. Daeho was helping his teacher, Bomyi, collect art supplies when the first energy beam struck the settlement. The woman was young and kind, with a gentle voice that made even the most frightened child feel safe, but now her face was pale with terror as she understood what was happening. "Children, stay calm," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to go to the emergency shelter right now. No running, just walk quickly and stay together." But it was too late. The second wave of attacks hit the school building directly. The energy weapons were not designed to kill quickly. They were meant to disable and destroy equipment while leaving structures mostly intact for salvage. But the side effects were deadly. In other ways, poisonous gas began seeping through the damaged air systems as chemical fires spread through the building. The ventilation that was supposed to keep them safe now carried death into every room. Neri began coughing as the toxic fumes reached the classroom where she and her brother had taken shelter with 12 other children. Daeho tried to cover her mouth with his shirt, but the gas was everywhere. "I cannot breathe," she whispered as her small body shook with each. Daeho held his sister close as the lights flickered and died around them. In the darkness, he could hear other children crying and calling for their parents. Teacher Bomyu was trying to reach them, but the corridors were filled with smoke and flames. "Do not be scared," he told Neri, even though his own heart was pounding with fear. "Mom and Dad will come for us. They always come." But deep underground, Tajin and Haijin were trapped as the mine shafts collapsed from the orbital bombardment. Tons of rock and twisted metal blocked their path to the surface. They clawed at the debris with their bare hands until their fingers bled, but it was no use. The attack lasted only 20 minutes. The insectoid ships methodically destroyed the settlement defenses, the communication arrays, and anything else that might be used to call for help. When they were finished, the small human colony was a smoking ruin. Commander Veltar reviewed the damage reports with satisfaction. The crystals were intact and ready for extraction. The human resistance had been eliminated with minimal losses to his own forces. The operation was a complete success. It was only when the landing parties entered the school building that they discovered what their chemical weapons had done. 37 small bodies lay still in the classrooms and corridors. The children had died slowly from the poisonous gas, their last moments filled with pain and terror. The insectoid soldiers who found them felt something they had never experienced before, a deep primitive fear that seemed to come from their very DNA. As if millions of years of evolution were screaming a warning they could not understand. They had broken the first land somewhere in the darkness of space. Automated beacons were already transmitting the news to every human world in the galaxy. The message reached Earth at exactly 1400 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Admiral Kyungsu was reviewing fleet readiness reports in his office when his aide burst through the door without knocking. The young lieutenant's face was white with shock and his hands trembled as he held the datapad. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," he stammered. The words came from Kepler 44 to be before the communication array was destroyed. Admiral Kyungsu read the message 3 times before the full meaning sank into his mind. 37 children dead, killed by chemical weapons in what should have been a safe place. The first law broken after 3,000 years of peace. The admiral stood slowly from his desk and walked to the window that overlooked the sprawling military complex below. Thousands of ships floated in the orbital yards, most of them designed for exploration and peaceful missions. But hidden among them were other vessels, ships that most people had never seen, ships that carried weapons no other species knew existed. "Contact or fleet commanders," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but something had changed in his eyes, something cold and terrible. "Signal condition black across all human space. Recall every vessel to battle stations." The aide hesitated. "Sir, should I not verify the message first? Perhaps contact the council for confirmation." "There is nothing to verify, Lieutenant. Those children are dead and someone will pay for it. Now send the signal within hours." The message had spread to every human world and station. Miners stopped working and looked up from their tunnels. Farmers left their fields and stared at the sky. Traders in distant markets heard the news and quietly began making their way home. And Mars General Yunha received the signal while inspecting the massive shipyards hidden beneath the planet's polar ice caps for 3 millennia. These facilities had operated in secret, building and maintaining humanity's true military strength. The ships that emerged from these yards were not the patrol boats and scouts that other species were familiar with. "Activate the reserve fleets," she ordered. "Tell them we are going to war." Her staff officers exchanged glances. War was a word that had not been spoken seriously in human space for generations. Their species had become known throughout the galaxy as peaceful traders and explorers. But now something ancient and terrible was stirring in the collective human consciousness. The Galactic Council received humanity's formal response exactly 12 hours after the attack. Ambassador Jamin entered the emergency session with tears still wet on his cheeks, but his voice was steady as he read the prepared statement. "The first law has been broken. 37 human children have been murdered by forces acting under council authority. We demand the immediate surrender of all personnel responsible for this act. You have 72 hours to comply." The chamber erupted in angry sounds. As delegates from hundreds of species voiced their outrage at being threatened, Commander Veltar rose from his section with his compound eyes glittering and amusing with, "Forget your place, human. The insectoid hive controls more worlds than your entire species occupies. We have fleets that number in the thousands, while you have barely enough ships to patrol your own borders, Ambassador." Jamin smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "You never understood what the first law was really about, did you, Commander? You think it was created to protect our children? Of course it was. What else could it be?" The human ambassador turned to address the entire council chamber, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "The first law was never about protecting human children, Commander. It was about protecting all of you from what we become when our children die." The ethereal chancellor floated forward, his energy form pulsing with concern. "Ambassador Jamin, perhaps we should discuss this matter through proper diplomatic channels. Violence serves no one." Violence? General Thakmore of the Stone People rumbled from his section. "The humans speak of violence as if they invented it. They are soft creatures who build pretty cities and write poetry. What do they know of real war?" Jamin looked at the ancient stone being with something like pity in his eyes. "General, you are old enough to remember the Reptilian Empire. What happened to them when they killed human children 3,000 years ago?" "That was different," the stone general replied, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "The humans caught them by surprise, used tactics that no one expected. But the galaxy has learned from that conflict. We know their methods." "Now you know nothing," Ambassador Jamin said quietly. "You have forgotten what we really are because we chose to let you forget. We became traders and explorers and teachers because we wanted to be something better than what we were, but our children are dead now, and we remember." Commander Veltar clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Then show us, human, what exactly do you think you can do against the combined might of the hive?" The ambassador reached into his diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small device that projected a hologram into the center of the chamber. The image showed space around the insectoid homeworld where dozens of massive ships had appeared without warning. "We are already doing it, Commander. Those are our true warships, the ones we built while you thought we were too weak to threaten anyone. Each one carries enough firepower to sterilize a planet, and we have thousands of them." The chamber fell silent as delegates stared at the hologram. The ships in the image were unlike anything they had seen before, sleek, predatory forms that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. These were not the peaceful vessels that humanity used for trade and exploration. "You have 71 hours remaining," Ambassador Jamin continued. "Your ships around Kepler 442b have already been destroyed, along with your mining operation in that system. Our fleets are moving toward every insectoid world as we speak. This is madness." Commander Veltar buzzed. "The Council will not allow you to wage war against a member species." The human ambassador began walking toward the exit, but paused at the chamber doors. "We are no longer members of this council. As of this moment, humanity withdraws from all treaties and agreements. We will handle this matter ourselves." "But you cannot simply declare war on an entire species," the ethereal chancellor protested. "What about innocent civilians? What about the principles of civilized behavior?" Ambassador Jamin turned back one final time, his eyes reflecting something that made even the energy being recoil. "You should have thought about innocent civilians before you killed our children, Chancellor. As for civilized behavior, we tried that for 3,000 years. Now you will see what we would before we became civilized." The chamber doors closed behind him, leaving the assembled delegates in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something that no one alive had ever seen before, the end of human patience and the beginning of something that would reshape the galaxy. Commander Veltar tried to maintain his confident posture, but his compound eyes kept returning to the hologram of human warships surrounding his home world. He began to understand that his species had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not the peaceful traders that everyone thought they were. They were something else entirely, something that had been sleeping for 3 millennia, waiting for someone to be foolish enough to wake it up that someone was him. Captain Dongwu stood on the bridge of the human warship, Vengeance, staring at a tactical display that showed 17 insectoid worlds spread across the sector. His ship was one of hundreds that had emerged from secret bases throughout human space, vessels that other species had never seen because they were never meant to be seen. The bridge crew worked in silence, their faces grim with purpose. These were not the same humans who had served on exploration ships and merchant vessels just days ago. Something fundamental had changed in them when the news of the children's deaths reached them. Chief Engineer Pixwell of the Peaceful Ones entered the bridge hesitantly. The small blue alien had served with Captain Dongwu for 8 years, and considered the human his closest friend, but today the captain seemed like a traitor. "Sir, we are receiving surrender offers from 3 insectoid colonies. They are asking for terms." Captain Dongwu did not turn away from the display. "What terms did the children receive?" Engineer Pixwell's translator struggled with the captain's tone. "Sir, perhaps we should consider that civilians live on those worlds. Many have never even heard of the attack on your colony." The captain finally turned and the engineer stepped back in shock. The human's eyes held something that made Pixwell's species instinctively want to flee. An ancient predator intelligence that had been hidden behind years of friendship and cooperation. "There are no civilians in this war, engineer, only those who supported the decision to kill our children and those who did nothing to stop it. Both are equally guilty, but Captain, surely some form of justice. The captain's voice was soft but carried clearly through the bridge. Justice would be bringing those children back to their parents. Since that is impossible, we settle for something else. What is that, sir? Consequence: the first insectoid world to face human retribution was a mining colony called HFY. The planet held 3 million beings, mostly workers who extracted rare metals for the insectoid war machine. It was defended by a squadron of 12 warships and an orbital defense platform. The human fleet that arrived in the system consisted of just 3 ships, but they were unlike anything the defenders had ever encountered. Each vessel was over 2 kilometers long, with armor that seemed to drink in the light from the system's star. They moved with a grace that defied their massive size. Basma commanded the insectoid defense fleet from his flagship. He had fought in dozens of battles and conquered systems across the galaxy. But as he watched the human ships approach, he felt something he had never experienced before: pure primal terror. Open communications. He ordered, "Attention, human vessels who are entering insectoid space without authorization, turn back immediately or face the consequences." The response came not in words but in action. The lead human ship fired a single weapon, a beam of energy so intense that it turned the orbital defense platform into vapor in less than a second. The structure simply ceased to exist, leaving not even debris behind. Admiral Busmar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The platform had been armed with shields capable of stopping conventional weapons and armor that could resist plasma bombardment. Yet it had been erased as if it had never existed. "Dual ships attack pattern 7, he commanded, but his voice shook as he gave the order. The insectoid warships opened fire with everything they had: particle beams, plasma cannons, missile salvos that could destroy cities. But their weapons simply vanished when they struck the human ships, absorbed by armor that defied understanding. The human response was methodical and terrifying. Each enemy vessel was targeted by a single beam that unmade it at the molecular level. 12 proud warships became nothing in the space of 30 seconds. Admiral Busmar tried to send a surrender signal but discovered that his communication systems had been disabled. He could only watch helplessly as the human ships turned their attention to the planet. Below, what followed was not bombardment or invasion, it was something worse. That humans used weapons that turned matter into energy, leaving empty spaces where cities had stood. They did not kill the inhabitants, they simply moved them elsewhere, dumping 3 million insectoids on barren worlds with nothing but basic survival supplies. "We could have destroyed them all," Captain Dongwu's tactical officer reported, "but instead we have created 3 million refugees who will spread word of what happens when humans are awakened." "That is the point," the captain replied. "Fear is a more effective weapon than death. Death ends suffering. Fear makes it eternal across insectoid space," the pattern repeated. Human fleets appeared at defended worlds and systematically dismantled everything they found. Military bases, industrial centers, government facilities all disappeared as if they had never existed. The inhabitants were relocated to prison worlds where they faced slow starvation. The insectoid Queen Mother watched her empire crumble from her throne world, her compound eyes reflected the tactical displays that showed system after system going dark. Human ships moved through her territory like a plague, consuming everything in their path. "How many fleets do they have?" she demanded of her military advisors. "We do not know, Your Majesty." General Thaxel replied, "Our intelligence indicated that humans possessed perhaps 200 warships at most, but we have confirmed sightings of over 1,000 vessels and more keep appearing. Where do they come from? How did they hide such a massive fleet?" General Thaxel's mandibles clicked nervously. "Your Majesty, we believe they have been building these ships in secret for centuries, perhaps millennia, hidden shipyards that our spies never discovered. But why build such a fleet if they intended to remain peaceful?" The Queen Mother received her answer when a human transmission reached her throne world. The message was simple and terrifying in its directness. "We built these ships because we knew that someday someone would be stupid enough to kill our children. We hoped we would never need to use them. We were wrong." The voice belonged to Admiral Kyungsu, and it carried the weight of a species that had been pushed beyond its limits. "You have destroyed our empire," the Queen Mother replied. "What more do you want?" "We want the galaxy to remember what happens when the first law is broken. We want every species to look at the empty space where your civilization used to be and understand the price of harming human children." The insectoid military tried one final desperate gambit. They gathered their remaining fleets around their most important worlds and prepared for a last stand. But the humans did not engage them in battle. Instead, they simply waited. Slowly, the insectoid fleets began to disintegrate as ships deserted or mutinied. Soldiers who had seen entire worlds erased were no longer willing to fight an enemy that could unmake reality itself. The proud insectoid war machine collapsed without firing another shot. In just 30 days, the insectoid hive went from being one of the galaxy's major powers to scattered groups of refugees begging for shelter on distant worlds. Their technology was destroyed, their military was broken, their pride was dust. But the humans were not finished. They had sent a message to every species in the galaxy, a demonstration of what happened when humanity stopped pretending to be civilized. The lesson was written in the empty spaces where a once mighty empire had existed. Again would anyone question why the first law existed. Never again would anyone be foolish enough to test human patience. and never again would anyone harm a human child without understanding the consequences. The galaxy had been reminded of what humans really were beneath their peaceful exterior. 6 months after the last insectoid world fell silent, the galaxy struggled to understand what it had witnessed. The hive that had once controlled hundreds of systems now existed only in refugee camps scattered across neutral space. Their mighty fleets were debris fields, their proud cities were empty craters, their civilization was a cautionary tale. Ambassador Jamin stood before the rebuilt galactic council in chambers that had been hastily constructed after the old ones were abandoned. When humanity withdrew, the new building was smaller, reflecting the reduced membership after several species had chosen to distance themselves from galactic politics. The human delegation had returned not as members but as observers. They sat in a section marked for non-aligned species, though everyone understood there was something far more dangerous than any traditional neutral party. Supreme Chancellor Ethmore of the Crystal Beings called the session to order. His crystalline form refracting light in nervous patterns. The ethereal race had stepped down from leadership after their handling of the crisis was deemed inadequate by surviving council members. We gather today to discuss the establishment of new galactic protocols. The Chancellor announced the recent events have shown us that our understanding of various species' capabilities was tragically incomplete. General Thokmore of the Stone People shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced seat. The ancient being had ruled his species for over 2,000 years, but recent events had shaken his confidence in ways he had never imagined. With respect, Chancellor, he rumbled. We all knew that humans possessed advanced technology. What none of us anticipated was the scale of their hidden military preparation. Commander Veltar was notably absent from the insectoid section. He had been found dead in his quarters 3 days after the final battle, apparently having taken his own life rather than face the consequences of his decisions. The few remaining insectoid representatives sat in silence, their compound eyes reflecting shame and defeat. Ambassador Jamin rose slowly from his seat. The assembled delegates fell silent as the human approached the speaking platform. His appearance had changed over the past months. The diplomat who had once worked tirelessly for peace now carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen his species' true nature unleashed. The galaxy seems confused about what has happened, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. Many of you have asked how humanity could have hidden such military strength for so long. The answer is simple: we never hid it. We simply chose not to use it. But surely intelligence networks should have detected such massive construction projects, protested Ambassador Clixwell of the Trading Federation. Your shipyards, your weapons development programs, they would have left traces. They did leave traces, Jamin replied. We never attempted to conceal our activities from serious investigation. What we concealed was the purpose. We told you we were building deep space exploration vessels, and you believed us because that is what you wanted to believe. The truth was that every human colony ship, every cargo hauler, every peaceful transport was built with military specifications. Every civilian vessel could be converted to a warship within hours. Every mining facility could produce weapons components. Every research station could develop new technologies of war. We have been preparing for this day for 3,000 years, Ambassador Jamin continued. Ever since the last time someone was foolish enough to harm our children, we hoped it would never be necessary, but we were ready. Chancellor Ethmore's crystalline structure flickered with anxiety. But why maintain such preparations if humanity truly desired peace? Surely the resources could have been better used for civilian purposes. Because peace is not a natural state, the human ambassador replied. Peace exists only when those capable of violence choose restraint. We chose restraint for 3 millennia. But when our children died, our choice changed. The council chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications of what they were hearing. Humanity had not been the peaceful species everyone assumed. They had been predators wearing the mask of civilization, waiting for someone to give them reason to remove it. What happens now? Asked General Thakmore. Do the humans intend to conquer the galaxy? Will you impose your will on all species? Jamin smiled sadly. We have no interest in conquest, General. We never did. What we want is very simple. We want to go home to our families and continue the lives we've built before someone forced us to remember what we really are. But the lessons of recent months cannot be forgotten, he continued. The first law exists not as an arbitrary restriction but as a fundamental truth. Those who harm human children will face consequences that their civilizations cannot survive. A new species rose to speak from the observer section. The Harmony Collective had remained neutral during the recent conflict, but their telepathic abilities made them valuable mediators. There sense no deception in the human words they announced in their musical tones, but we also sense something else beneath the surface, a capacity for violence that remains ready to emerge if triggered again. That is correct, Jamin acknowledged. We return to our peaceful ways because we choose to do so, but let no one mistake that choice for weakness. We are what we have always been, apex predators who decided to build something better than endless war. The question now is whether the galaxy has learned the lesson we have taught. Over the following months, the new order took shape. The first law was not merely restored but elevated to become the foundation of all galactic interaction. Every treaty, every trade agreement, every diplomatic protocol began with explicit recognition that human children were never to be harmed under any circumstances. Memorial beacons were placed throughout the former insectoid territory, broadcasting constant reminders of what had happened to the species that broke the sacred law. The empty systems served as monuments to folly and warnings to future generations. Military academies across the galaxy revised their curricula to include detailed studies of human warfare, not as academic exercise but as practical necessity. Every officer had to understand what they would face if they ever found themselves opposing humanity in battle. Trade with human worlds increased dramatically as species sought to strengthen their relationships with the galaxy's apex predators, but it was trade conducted with new understanding and careful respect. No one wanted to risk triggering another awakening them. Human fleets returned to their hidden bases, but everyone knew they remained ready. The peaceful merchant ships that traveled between stars carried crews trained in warfare. The exploration vessels that mapped new systems were armed with weapons that could erase worlds. Children throughout the galaxy learned new lessons in their schools. They were taught about the insectoid hive and its fate. They were shown images of empty star systems where a mighty civilization had once thrived. They were made to understand that some lines must never be crossed on Earth. Admiral Kyung-soo stood in his office watching the orbital shipyards through his window. The massive construction facilities had returned to building exploration vessels and cargo haulers. But now everyone understood that such classifications were merely temporary designations. His aide approached with the daily report. Sir, the refugee resettlement programs are proceeding on schedule. The former insectoid populations are adapting to their new circumstances. Good. The Admiral nodded. See that they receive adequate supplies. We are not monsters, despite what some may think. Of course, sir. The aide hesitated. Should we be concerned about potential revenge attacks? Some of the displaced populations might harbor resentment. Admiral Kyung-soo smiled grimly. Let them harbor whatever feelings they choose, Lieutenant, but make sure they understand something else. Let them know that we showed mercy by allowing them to survive. When the next species considers harming our children, they will have survivors to tell them what restraint looks like. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Written in the ashes of a broken empire, the first law was not just a rule to be followed. It was a promise of consequences that no civilization could survive. The humans had returned to their peaceful ways, but everyone understood that this peace existed only by their choice, and everyone prayed that no one would ever be foolish enough to test that choice again.